Well, friends, it is good to see you this morning. I think we'll go ahead and jump into things. If you are not at the moment, go ahead and mute yourselves. If you feel the need to speak up at some point, you can unmute yourself. But we'll get started with this call today on our 5th of 6th planned NCN call as far as a workshop series on the matter of community and unsettled times. We're going to be hearing a lot about matters related to finding and forming intentional communities and issues that are common to young communities. By the way, if you don't recognize me, I'm Laura Kellerman from the Eden community in Abilene, Texas. You can see beautiful and not terribly hot yet Abilene behind me here. Hope you all are enjoying the weather wherever you are. So yeah, I'm excited about the conversations that we're going to have today, and we've got some really wonderful people who are going to share with us from their experience. I'll tell you a little bit more about them here in just a minute. I want to, as we get into the conversation today, to recognize the fact that many of us, rightly so, have our heads and our hearts wrapped around some of the issues that have been brought to the forefront in recent days around issues of justice for people of color, and that is extremely important. I think that is where our heads and our hearts need to be. But I also want to recognize the fact that while there are ways in which that can connect with this conversation about intentional community, and I want us to engage that if it comes up, I also want to make sure that as important as those things are, that we are also able to maintain our focus toward the matters at hand about beginning intentional communities and finding ways to nurture those from the beginning. So I just want to invite us maybe for 30 seconds or so into a moment of silence as we contemplate the things that are going on in our world around us, and we hold those before the Spirit and ask the Spirit to guide us in setting those things to the side for the moment to allow us to look at what is at hand in front of us right now, but also to see ways in which those might intersect with this conversation. So let's just take 30 seconds or so of silence to kind of center ourselves into this conversation this morning and see where the Spirit guides us, okay? So as I mentioned, we've got some really wonderful people who are going to be presenting with us this morning. We've got Jackie Morges from Poplar Place in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we've got Hannah and David Hetty who are in Portland, Oregon. We're going to let each of those groups present for about 15 minutes, and we'll have a breakout session after each of them does, in which we can kind of discuss what is coming up and emerging and what it is that they have to share with us and what the Spirit is guiding us into. But each of them are going to be sharing with us a little bit about what their experience has been like in the process of starting a new community and walking into that process and learning from that, and the questions that they're encountering, the wisdom that they're gleaning from that. And I imagine that this can be a really, really rich conversation. So before we get into all of that, I think Ian Shelburne from the Eden community is going to lead us in a prayer, and then I will introduce Jackie just a little bit more. Ian?
Father, thank you for meeting with us like this, that you can meet us via Zoom or however. Thank you for each person who is on this call and those who may be joining, for the communities represented, for your life. And Father, just give us capacity by your grace to sense your life today, to share it with each other. Bless our questioning, our reflecting, our answering, our sharing, guided by your good Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So first up, we've got Jackie Morges, who is from Poplar Place community in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I might not be saying that right. I don't have that Northeastern accent. She has been a part of that community since its inception, I believe, about 2 years ago, and they currently have 4 members. And so she's going to be talking with us a little bit about the process of forming that community, starting with a lot of dreams, seeing what life brings them, and what kinds of things the Spirit brings in their midst, and how that process sometimes goes according to plan and other times not. Engaging the transitions that come about in the midst of that. So Jackie, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and we'd love to hear what the Spirit has to say to us through you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good morning. As was said, my name is Jackie Morges, and I am one of the founding members of our community. The Poplar Place was started a little over 2 years ago in Lancaster City, Pennsylvania, but we took nearly an entire year before we actually moved in together. So all in all, we've been dreaming and cultivating our community for 3 years now. Our community began with 4 20-somethings from 3 different states, but with a similar spiritual culture of having worked or been a student leader with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. Other than some shared experience with the same campus ministry, which helped inspire a lot of our ideas and vision of what kind of community we wanted to be, we didn't know each other before we committed to this big experiment called community life. Our initial commitment to each other was for 1 year with a hope for more, but in all honesty, anything longer than that at that time with a collection of strangers felt quite terrifying. We hoped to live in a neighborhood where we as 4 white people would be the minority. We also wanted to live side by side with neighbors who worked low-wage jobs and hoped that the jobs we'd find would keep us in a similar income bracket and occupy a max of 30 hours. 2 of us wanted to start a community garden from our home. But other than those few tenets, we didn't pretend to know much more about where intertwining our lives with our literal neighbors would lead us. That would depend on who exactly would become our neighbors. In just 2 years' time, it's quite a shock to take note of which starter dreams took off, what new passions and commitments mysteriously developed, and the many people who have come through our home to help form and shape us. Even in our short history, our community has seen 9 different members and experienced the accompanying heartbreak that comes with each of those transitions. Our community continues to be centered around knowing our neighbors, although our methods to do so have regularly changed. One important expression of this has led us all to work service industry jobs in walking distance to our home, allowing us to both interact with and know the hustle and exhaustion of our neighbors. Our community garden initiative has expanded exponentially, going from 1 backyard garden to this spring growing hundreds of our own organic starter plants and installing them in 20 gardens around our neighborhood. We also are starting to offer free produce from a table outside our home, kind of a take what you want situation, where we hope many nearby gardeners, including ourselves, will drop off their extra harvest for passerbys to come and glean. We've also installed gardens at local churches, schools, and community centers so they can do the same. A lot of the other pieces of who we are still being figured out. We are very much in process, and for all the more senior communities on the call today, I will make a shameless plug that we would love a mentor community. So if anything from our story hits you or feels like a good match, let me know. I would have never guessed when I set out to start this community that even 2 years in, I would regularly feel the fragility of all we're attempting to do and who we want to be, balanced with the transient nature of our membership. Even when longer timelines were originally in mind, things in people's lives are constantly changing. And as a result, we seem too often to be saying goodbyes, which for our community has developed into a beautiful tradition of elaborate celebration and closure, and perhaps even more frequently, attempting to wisely discern possibly new members. Just the act of continuing to exist can seem to consume a large amount of our communal energy. And because we are such a small community, every new member deeply and significantly shapes our culture. And likewise, their departure leaves emotional and practical holes. We seem to constantly be reshaping ourselves clarifying how to live well together, which doesn't always allow the time we'd like to develop our long-term goals and vision. In that vein, we have 2 additional rules of life: a commitment to LGBTQ people and hospitality that we haven't been able to fully discuss yet. So much of our communal life seems to develop as situations come and life happens. For example, we didn't initially set out for one of our core foundations to be being a safe place for the LGBT community members to live out their faith. However, when God connected us with a now community member who was in need of transitional housing and had never before experienced a space where they could be non-binary, queer, and a Jesus follower, it suddenly became an integral part of who we are. And I think this is one of the most exciting pieces of community for me. You truly don't know where the Holy Spirit will take you. I have grown interests and spiritual practices so different from what I ever enjoyed before, I often don't recognize myself. But I mean that in the most positive way. Community propels you to constantly grow. And so my highest recommendation is to remain open and be brave to try new things. I think one of the biggest surprises of starting community has been the reality of relationships. I think a lot of people choose community because they want relational commitment and stability. In a culture that prides itself on independence and struggles with isolation and loneliness, community offers companionship, support, and partnership. For me, as a young single person, a big appeal of community was sharing a full, purposeful life with others. And that part has absolutely been true, but becoming each other's people takes time and a whole lot of work. And just because you have shared beliefs and shared practices in common doesn't mean you will automatically know how to love and be there for each other. Even in community, you don't get to rush past that part. And perhaps uniquely to new communities, you often aren't all that sure how much you have in common because you haven't been able to have those in-depth discussions yet. So I've learned that as much as I love people, relationships are not just about the good parts. They require you to get your hands dirty and invest a lot. In fact, I think the relationship part of intentional community is where you have to be the most intentional. Meaningful relationships where you feel truly known only come after many experiences together and a whole lot of dedicated, not always easy or natural time. But even with the hard work that comes from creating and sustaining community relationships, I'm still certain that for me, the adventure and experiment of community is more than worth it. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. That was beautiful. It's great to hear more of your community's experience and what you've learned through the midst of that. Kent, I think, is going to break us up into some breakout rooms for about maybe 10 minutes or so. Let's take just a couple minutes to introduce yourself to whoever's in your room with you and get a sense for who is in the room and where you're coming from. And then just to share a little bit more about what it is that Jackie shared with us that's resonating with you or questions that's bringing up. Before we do that, though, Jackie, real quick, do you mind introducing us to the person who's joined you on your screen?
Yes, this is David.
Hello.
And he's a fellow Poplar Place community member.
Anything you'd like to add, David, before we transition into the breakout rooms?
Oh, I couldn't possibly add to that. That's wonderful. Yeah.
I'll also say,
great.
if you search your screen, Joseph Landis, who's wearing a hat today, is another Poplar Place community member.
Well, it is good to have you all on the call. Kent, you want to go ahead and send us into those breakout rooms, and then we will join back up here in a little bit to hear from Hannah and David. Well, I know in our room we had some really rich conversations about what it is that we're learning from Jackie in Poplar Place. I imagine all of the other rooms did as well. Some questions came up for us, some observations about ways in which we might grow based on the experiences that we're hearing about from them. I think we are in for yet another treat with Hannah and David Heddy, who are in Portland, Oregon. They are also in some conversations about community, kind of working toward forming community. And I think Hannah told me they've been in the midst of that process for about 3 years, if I'm remembering right. And that's a pretty long, intense, demanding process, as many of us know from experience. It sounds like they're at the point right now where they are basically at the point of forming community, if I'm correct on that. If not, Hannah and David, you'll correct me. And they've got about 6 adults and 6 kids, which I also know from experience is a challenge to have that kind of balance of adults and kids in community. So they're going to be sharing with us a little bit more about kind of the stages that they've gone through and have experienced when it comes to forming community, beginning with a dream, moving forward through various stages into action. And I am excited to hear from them. So David, Hannah, what do you have to share with us today?
Good morning. So I'm Hannah.
I'm David.
And we have 3 children. They're all school aged, elementary school aged. And I think that has enabled us to even think about this. So we live in Portland, Oregon, and we've been with Springwater Community for the last 10 years. And it's been a really wonderful place to grow and be a family with them. We have now embarked on starting a new community and really honored to share our experiences with you. And many of you have encouraged us along the journey. And Laura's right, it's like 3 years ago we first brought this up with Springwater. And I think that we're slow workers, maybe because we had small children, I don't know why. And I also think that leaving an existing community takes a little more intentionality. And so how I'm gonna organize this talk is I'm gonna share the general stages we've gone through. And Dave and I will take turns going through those stages. And then at the end, I'll share what I've learned. So the first stage, I call it the dream begins. So David and I met at World Hunger Relief training farm in Waco, Texas. And we became part of Hope Fellowship for 2 or 3 years. And that was where we first caught a love for the beauty and connectedness of mutual care. We learned about Anabaptism, discipleship, and just being known. Like the person in the pew next to you knows your name. And that was surprising. So we left Hope Fellowship after that 3 years. I'm from the Pacific Northwest and wanted to return this direction. So we left blanketed in Hope Fellowship's prayers and encouragement to continue down the path of living in community. So when we got here, we looked to create or find an intentional community, and that was like a year of doing that, but nothing came together. And we eventually discovered Springwater Community in Portland in its fledgling stages. So they were picking a neighborhood, they were beginning to write a covenant, and we were about to have our first baby. So David's gonna share next.
Yeah, so hi everybody. So we arrived at Springwater with this intense interest of someday starting a community someplace close to where we are, or perhaps serving with the Mennonite Central Committee, which we've always been interested in doing that work. And so as we were stepping into membership with Springwater, one of the things that they urged us to do was to sort of set down our personal dreams and that sense of calling for a season to see if it would reappear as the body of Springwater. And so I think that was kind of hard to hear at first. It made some sense to us. I think what was really clear is that we were here to learn and grow in this work. I remember a conversation with David Jansen, particularly him sitting down with us and saying, hey, that's great, you have the calling. We need people to start communities. Why don't you commit for 5 years and see what happens? And so here we are 10 years later, we doubled up David's challenge to us. And so I think what we needed to gain wisdom through the experience of what it is like to form. So luckily we got into Springwater pretty early when we could learn how the formation process works and the writing of covenant. And like Jacqueline talked about, the early challenges of the storming phase of relationship building where you have a lot of tough conversations. Over the years, we're able to receive from and contribute a lot to Springwater. We've been on the leadership team. We've gotten to serve in a lot of different roles, a lot with kids and formation there. And it's been an honor and a blessing to get to raise a family here. Our kids all were born into this community, and really this is our family. We're a part of our family. So Springwater has continued to care for us and has been a base for our discipleship and support as we launch out into the work that we're talking about today. So fast forward several years, and this community birthing dream persisted in us. It's something that we discerned with the Gatlins and several others at Hope Fellowship. It's something David Jansen continued to nurture in us as well, this birthing process. And part of Springwater's vision was to send out seeds of hope into other areas. So we wanted to live into that aspect of Springwater's vision. So this dream persisted in us. We felt prepared now to venture out and lead a new effort. We sensed it was time to begin exploring this. And as Hannah said, there's the process of building, but there's also the process of leaving and detaching from the community we're in. So we connected with some Nurturing Community Network, or NCN friends, and they advised us to write our vision on paper. This helped us to gather our thoughts. It gave us some something tangible to work with. And we wanted to use this vision as a roadmap of our calling, and that we would prayerfully hone it with others as they joined into the vision. So I just wanted to share a few lines from that vision that we wrote early on. So we are looking towards birthing an intentional Christian community in the area of Portland, Oregon. This community would participate in and support the local church, as well as the neighborhood, spurring on deep friendships and expanding seeds of Christ's love to new areas. Together with our church and neighbors, we would engage in the work of spiritual and community development. Through all this, we desire to see people know Jesus. Now I'm gonna skip down quite a bit here. Got into a few of the nuts and bolts. Shared life may look like the following: caring for one another, encouragement, meals, childcare, worship. We hope for shared property and housing and shared common space. There would be the possibility of shared work. We hope for good stewardship and generosity with our possessions, a shared clothesline, sauna, storage, garden, and kids' play area. Finally, let's not forget the messier shared things: carrying one another's burdens, courageous conversations, accountability, lice outbreaks. Elizabeth remembers that. Temper tantrums, lots of germs, ... Have we scared everyone away yet? So, and it just continued, but it was nice to be able to get that down on paper and begin sharing it with others. And probably some of you were able to see that as we shared it out. We believe that God's direction is most fully heard through a body of believers. So we started the steps of discernment. We shared our written vision statement with Springwater. As can be expected with a church family, it was received with some questions and concerns about our reasons for leaving. And some encouragements as well. I remember a lot of conversations. What's the push of moving out from Springwater and the pull that's drawing you towards something new? There was ample time to discuss a lot of these different questions, sometimes one-on-one, and to let the reality sink in that the Headies might be leaving one day to start another community. Springwater blessed us richly with their support, They offered us continued membership in the community, commissioned us to go out and explore the next steps. They assigned an accompanist to us, Rusty. I don't know if Rusty's on today, who has walked with us along this journey. He's met with us periodically to ask important questions as we're thinking about these steps, to pray with us. And it really gave us a strong foundation to launch out in this work.
So we've been launched out. Where do we start? Luckily, I have David, who's a community development guy, and from his work, he knows practical steps for these kinds of things. So he outlined a process: discover, create, act, sustain. And we were in the first step of discovering for way too long. You'll get a taste for my impatience. So I'm going to talk about this discover stage. So it feels like you can organize a community around people, place, or mission. Those are great places to start. But let's just say we lacked all of those three pieces. So in other words, we didn't know where to start, and we didn't have clarity about who or where. And I just think the world is full of mission, and I just sensed that the mission would come once the other pieces were in place. So one thing we did know from writing down our vision was that reconciliation and ministry and partnership with the wider body of believers was going to be really important. We didn't want to just connect with intentional Christian community folks, but we wanted to break out into the wider church. So we began by visiting lots and lots of churches, and our kids were champs. We were encouraged through this experience. We met wonderful Jesus followers in our city and witnessed beautiful things churches were doing together. And it was a real journey of discovery and brought up a lot of questions like, what do we want? What do we need? What do the kids need? And we also saw that most of these Sunday churches, I'll call them, had no idea what we were talking about when we shared our vision of community. So that made working with the wider body begin to look more and more challenging and exciting. How could we build bridges and meet people where they're at? How could our intentional Christian community work in partnership with a church? So we also spent a lot of time connecting with people, individuals, and once a month we started meeting in our home to talk about these things and pray about them. And the purpose was to get to know one another and give updates, see what steps needed exploring. It was also helpful during this time to study other communities and be inspired by, you guys all have various emphases on mission and common work and service, diversity, worship, and that was really beautiful. So we were in this discovery stage for more than a year, exploring churches, waiting to find partners. Particularly seasoned partners was something that we were hoping to find. And this year felt really long and tested my patience. I'm thankful our friends, the Term and Bryants, initiated a weekly Sunday night rice and beans routine where we would check in, and that was really helpful. So thank you, Term and Bryants. So fast forward some more, we nailed it down to like 2, 3, 4 churches that are a good fit from our perspective, and we entered into some meetings with those pastors to see how they would feel about an intentional community joining their church. And we continued to be praying for partnerships with the right individuals in the right church.
So then the ball really started rolling, and we started connecting with some families more deeply. So Andra and Darren Williams, I think Andra's on if you want to wave. So they've been interested partners all along the way. We've been friends for many years, and they have had interest in Christian community as well. So we began connecting more with them. And then from the ranks of Springwater, the Butler family, Tyson and Mallory, who I also think might be on, if you want to give a wave, Tyson and Mallory, joined into the conversation. So we started getting some momentum in a cohort of people that had the giftings, the interest, the capabilities, the passion to begin imagining what could be the path forward. And so my wife, with all of her patience, we began finally moving forward and trying to move from the discovery into create and act. So yeah, it's definitely scary to know that things are changing. You know, we've been really rooted and planted here, and taking steps, especially things like taking your children out of the school that they've been in. We have 3 children in the same school. We've invested deeply here on a soccer and a basketball coach, and it just means uprooting and going someplace else. It's honestly scary to us, but the promise of God's presence and the promise of seeing seeds of hope spread is bigger and better, and we want to root ourselves in that. The Butlers came with a strong and very convicting mission to this work. They have a passion for Native American reconciliation and reparation. And as we joined into some of the conversations with them, it was contagious. It began spreading, and it really dovetailed perfectly with our long-term interest of earth and creation care. And it began being compelling to all of us. And so it also helped to start building some of the momentum. So some of that people, place, what, the mission part was becoming more clear. So we pursued further discernment with Springwater. It was confirmed to the Butlers to join in and to embark on this mission together. So we had 2/3 of those puzzle pieces, people and mission, in place, but place was still left. So at that point, we were released from Springwater from membership. And right about that time, COVID hit. And so it definitely put a significant barrier to meeting together to keep the momentum going. So we continued to meet via Zoom. We scheduled meetings with different Native American leaders in Portland, got to know pastors of a Native American church here. We connected with Randy and Edith Woodley from Elohe Farms. They live here locally as well. Nurturing community folks, we met with many of you, and we continued to meet as a community on Zoom. So the work continued. We began outlining and tackling some of the deeper questions that we were holding. Reading the Intentional Christian Community Handbook, we realized more and more what we're getting ourselves into. And we met with Evan Howard, who might be on the call today. We met him on a breakout session. We contacted him because we could tell, Evan, you had wisdom and care and interest. And he directed us to an article he had written, 5 Essential Ingredients of Community. And that spurred us on to start looking at our purpose and values and practices as a community. And that's what we've been working on the last couple of weeks. We've also been laying out from the Intentional Christian Community Handbook. If you don't have it, we highly recommend getting a copy of it. It's very practical and inspiring. They talk about how important it is to have connection, to hold the community with the wider body of Christ, a community that can walk with you. So we value our connection to Springwater. We hope that we can stay connected with them to care for us into the future. So we are in the process of looking at where to settle down. We're looking at settling on a location, have a good decision-making plan in place so we can launch into that next stage, which is ACT. So just a note on leaving well, and then I'm going to pass it back to Hannah for a quick few things on learnings. So this stage has been ongoing throughout the process of leaving. We're committed to leaving well and keeping good ties to Springwater. It it really isn't going to happen until we physically leave our neighborhood here. I think this co-laboring idea will always remain. And we hope to always be encouraging to one another, spurring each other on. And we are deeply interested in nurturing community networks and being a part of this work, and really value it deeply. Okay. Hang with us for one more minute.
Yeah, so those are our stages. I'm going to share what I've been learning. I can't say enough for staying grounded in prayer and scripture and worship if you're in a season of discernment. To keenly hear God's voice, we have to be like the sheep who know the shepherd's voice. And we have to be like branches abiding in the vine. It's also been a gift to have supportive friends and mentors who patiently help us hone the vision and face the unknowns. And so we've had hundreds of discussions, and I thank each of you for walking with us through our questions. And thankfully, we've felt free all along to reach out and ask questions. As a couple, but you could relate this to any team, sometimes we had to wait for each other and not push way ahead of one another. And it is hard to get on the same page at times. So we learned to validate and accept each other's feelings a little better. As a family, we had to establish that it's okay to brainstorm and think out loud, and that doesn't mean we're going to act on that next week. So that enabled us to check out a church or a town, and everyone knew that it was okay to experiment and look around. Some places were real flops and it was no big deal. And I don't think it was a waste of our time either. So I'm grateful that the kids remained patient and somewhat curious. I also got to know myself better. And I found that attention to good process is important to me, and my kids' well-being through this season is important to me. I had to learn how to rest and wait and let myself be creative instead of so productive. My mind was often full of thoughts and scenarios and planning, and I just learned to do my best to pull together wisdom and experience. I began to read a few necessary books. I'm not really a reader or a theologian, but this got me reading. And it's been a rich season spiritually as I go out of my comfort zone. This type of endeavor is not for the faint of heart. Sometimes I have like anxious thoughts and I awake in the night thinking, and I just have to realize you're not going to solve this. This isn't a brain puzzle. If you want to go back to sleep, you need to pray, give it to God, and depend on God. It's the only way through. I've also learned to be more open-minded about how community should look. It's not a box with a bow on top. So it's living, moving people with real life factors. So when I become puzzled, I can circle back to this openness and a reminder that God can use us anywhere and we don't have to be superheroes. It's okay for us to have backup plans or safety nets like renting for the first year. And learning to give ourselves permission to factor in our own needs, build in rest and fun and creativity and simplicity, and approach this with joy. And we really do have a lot of kids in the mix, so family's going to be really central to what we're doing. I've learned to release control. So if next year this community birthing endeavor doesn't pan out to the end, I've just learned to say, okay, I'm going to be okay. You're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. And God is still good, and our faith has still grown in significant ways. And something freeing happens when we can trust that this is God's work and not our work. So the seeds of the gospel are full of power and potential, and the kingdom will go forward. And our job in participation is to be good soil. That's really the end of what I wanted to share. So hopefully this blesses other communities as they begin to form and encourages everyone.
Back to you, Laura.
Well, thank you, Hannah. Thank you, David. I will confess that due to some internet connectivity issues, I missed about 2 minutes in the middle of that, and I was really sad. But I, for one, have been immensely blessed by what you have shared today, even in that moment of tension about, let me get back online. I've been really blessed by some of the things that you were saying just now. Let's take about 5 minutes in some breakout rooms and see what is coming to the surface as far as what David and Hannah have shared with us about their experience. And then we'll come back here for some question and answer time for those of you who are able to stick around. We're getting close to the time of the 11 o'clock end time that we've talked about in the past, but we've also built up a little bit of a culture of staying a little bit longer for those who are able. So I hope you'll be able to. But for now, let's have some conversation in breakout rooms. We'll see you back here in a minute.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Once again, I imagine we had some really great conversations in those rooms. I know we did in ours. If you need to go, feel no shame in leaving. We did say 11 o'clock, but if you are able to stay, we would welcome you to stay. And we'd love to have a time of question and answer for Jackie and for David and Hannah, and any of the other Poplar Place members who are here too. What are the things that are kind of coming to mind that you'd like to inquire a little bit more about? Feel free to type those in the chat and we'll kind of address those as they come up. In the meantime, thank you, David. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Jackie, for everything that you've said. I know that I have been so encouraged by you sharing your testimony and the things that you're learning, the ways that God has been guiding you and challenging you and leading you into deeper growth and deeper blessing and service in the places that you're at. I think you've shared a lot of wisdom with us this morning, and I hope that you have also been encouraged by the process. I know we have.
Thank you.
Too bad. Oops. Oh well.
Well, as we wait for some questions in the chat log, one question that kind of came up for me that I think both of you could address from different perspectives is, what are you learning about best practices, if any, for transitioning members in and out, needs that you're seeing within that process? Because that's a big deal. And your communities are both experiencing that in some different ways, but you're both experiencing that. So what are you learning that's been really good and helpful in the midst of that process?
I can jump in. Yeah, that's a great question, and I feel like one that we talk about really regularly. I mentioned that our community has developed quite an elaborate goodbye celebration to really, because even if we've had members that have been in our community for as short as 2 months, but our community, we all live together. And so even in 2 months, we make so much space for their contribution. And we really feel the loss of that. And so part of our tradition has been all of the remaining community members going around and affirming all that individual contributed to us, and all the ways that we experience God through them. And preparing a big feast that honors what they enjoy eating. And really giving space to kind of say goodbye and thank you. And also invite opportunity for the leaving member to share what they learned from us, as well as how they would encourage us in ways that we can continue to grow and be better and welcome in better. So that's been a huge piece for us.
I love that idea of making celebration such a central part of things, getting into some feast days, even quite literally, around the idea of membership and community. What about David and Hannah?
Thank you. Yep.
Well, so we're writing a vision and practices statement, and I'm hoping as people come in, that will be just a welcoming way to let them know what we're thinking. And as far as leaving Springwater, it's similar to that. There's people write songs for us when we left, and a lot of people haven't left well, to be honest, from Springwater, and that's why we're so committed to doing it well. it hurts when people just take off. So we want to, yeah, we've made a list of, yeah, we're going to have a feast and a goodbye party. And yeah, we're going to do it right. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I would say, I think, there's like what we all would like hope and what's perfect, and it never goes that way. And I think we all need to really be okay with that, to welcome people, to have, clear understanding, hopes, commitments, so people know what they're getting into, but keep a really open back door for people to be able to leave with grace and love. And we don't know people's stories. They may come in and go and then start something new a few months later or join another community. So there's a lot of people that end up in community that come with a lot of hurt and from church or trauma from other experiences. And we want to be a place where people can heal and restore. And if it's not our community or Springwater, hopefully another community down the road. So we want to be a good stop along the way. I would say in general, for the work we've done so far, there have been quite a few people that have shown interest and then have stopped. And we try to check back in with them sometimes and just ask, hey, has anything changed? But just to be really loose with how we're holding that.
Thank you, guys. A question that's come up in the chat for the Headies from Sean is, what have been the challenges that have arisen between relationships of family and children and community priorities? And I know, Hannah, we've talked about that a little bit in other offline conversations. What has arisen in that and how were those resolved? Or have they been at this point?
That's the question.
So just what are some of the conflicts between the work we're doing in community and our family?
Oh, well, a surprising, well, maybe it's not surprising. You guys are all very wise, but our son is in 5th grade, and it was surprising his reaction to us moving. It was like digging in. I'm not moving with you. Tell me all the reasons we're moving. And so we weren't quite ready for that, but we're praying for his heart to soften, and he's shown a little more interest. But yeah, and that's going to be an ongoing thing. It's like mom and dad want to start a community, but he wants to stay with his basketball team, So.
And Hannah alluded to it. I think one of the biggest tension points for us has been, she's been a little quicker. Hannah has been moving faster and I've been moving slower. And that speed differential has been hard. She wants resolution. And I think the detaching process has been harder, not harder, but just we've held it differently and it's taken me longer. And so I think that has caused a lot of challenging conversations. Our girls, we've got 2 girls, 1 9, 1 6. They're just ready to go. So they're like, when are we moving? But I would say there's also extended family. There's our immediate family and then extended family. For the most part, our families, we've been doing this for a long time, know what we're up to with community, but it's that conversation about what viewing church as family is hard at times, and how important, Christ as the center, but church as our organizing center, that can be hard for extended family to wrestle with that concept. So I think we've done pretty well at like honoring what commitments we have to our extended family and getting their perspective. So it's not just something we're trying to decide on our own, or just even with Springwater, but trying to go out to that next layer of extended family and say, hey, how does this impact you? And how can we care for you in this process as well? But Tyson and Mallory are on here too, and they also are going through similar things with their family. I don't know if you'd like to say anything, Tyson or Mallory, about that.
I think you captured it. I think that certainly flows into our conversation about place, you know, that ongoing piece of that planning process. So it's an integral part.
Yeah, that's a really big question that I personally have, and I think that that would be a really great question for us to address even more fully next time we gather. We'll be having a panel of some kind of seasoned community members speaking into this whole process of community from what they've learned from their experience and responding to some questions that we bring. And I would love to hear more from them at that point, because that's an ongoing question for me too. So another question that's come up is from William, and he asks, apart from the Intentional Community Handbook, which he is excited to have learned about today, are there any recommended resources that you guys have, the Headies, Poplar Place, books, videos, and so on, for guidance on forming and funding and establishing new communities? So things that you've found helpful, and if there are others who have found some great resources, feel free to speak into that as well.
We have a few, but we'll let Jackie, if you want to share anything first.
Oh, thank you. David is running to his book collection, which is literally a full wall of books. So as the non-reader, I'll just say, yeah, the Intentional Christian Community Handbook, David Jansen on the call, and I know many other contributors, unbelievable. Also, for me, reading Shane Claiborne's Irresistible Revolution was impactful for me, but I'll let David jump in.
Okay. Also, Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Really good, pretty slim, easy to read. And also, I say this with a caveat, Community and Growth by Jean Vanier.
All the head nods, love it.
Another excellent resource, I would say, second only to maybe the Intentional Christian Community Handbook. Yeah, those are two very terrific resources as well. Actually, I think David Jensen does a very good job at the end of his book of having a whole list of very good books to go into. So, yeah, it's a selection.
I would add how much Elizabeth O'Connor's book, Call to Commitment, like, it was so beautifully and creatively just giving me room to imagine. And Art Gish had a book about living in Christian community, the classic. And then I've been reading Dave and Nita Jackson's Living Together in a World Falling Apart. That's an easy read too.
And the Prayer of Jabez also would be one we'd recommend.
No, but I would say the book of Hebrews in the Bible has lately, just seeing the people with great faith, it gives me encouragement to try to step out also.
I really like that connection, Hannah. The idea of being on pilgrimage, essentially, in the book of Hebrews is a lot about what the experience of intentional community is like, especially whenever you talk about experimentation, going into realms that are unknown and unexperienced by many, many people. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm seeing a lot of other really great recommendations in the chat. If some of those that were mentioned are not yet on the NCN page, we might consider adding them there at some point as a list of resources. And I'm also really hopeful that there will be more and more resources emerging over the years to come from the very people in this conversation, because I think there's a lot of amazing wealth of experience and wisdom that is here in this room. So I'm glad that we're able to connect and network in this way, and I hope we'll continue to share. Another question that was brought up for Poplar Place is about if you guys have any sort of relationship with servant partners. I'm not personally familiar with who servant partners are. Sounds like you aren't either, but it might be somebody worth checking out. Any other questions for these two communities here? Got some really good conversation going on about resources in the chat. Well, kind of in line with what I was just mentioning, I'm curious to hear if either of your communities wants to say a little bit more about the idea of experimentation, because that is a pretty important component of a lot of intentional community experiences, is just trying new things and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't under the guidance of the Spirit. And that, I think, is one of the major gifts that the intentional community movement has to offer to the church and the world at large. So do you have any experiences there or any words of insight about the idea of experimentation?
Well, I can jump in and say, kind of building off of Evan's question, I'm not familiar with servant partners, and we'll look into them after this, but in the vein of experimentation, I think something that's really helped our community is that all of us have had very different short-term experiences among communities. I kind of got my start on the world race, which some people might be familiar with. David has stayed at different monasteries that he can speak to. And so I think our experimentation was seeing a lot of different ways of living this kind of life, and then just testing things out and being okay to not know if we would do it again, or if, I think for me, what community has really helped is you have a safety net as you try to be bold. So even if, you know, we've done a lot of hosting with our neighbors, and we kind of always go into those things with the posture of, even if no one shows up, we'll be with each other and that will be a win. And so I think that's relieved some pressure. And then when one person shows up, we're elated. So yeah, I think knowing you have each other, even if the things that you're trying don't take in the way that you thought. I don't know if David or Joe want to say anything else on that, or let David and Hannah jump in.
I'll just speak in support of experimentation and trying new things. I think a gift of community for me has been that as a thinker primarily, I'm in community with like both thinkers and doers, and that gets me into new spaces. So a good example of something that has arisen organically in our community is our garden ministry, where we have a very large garden in our backyard, and also have been supporting neighbors in our throughout our city in revamping their backyards and growing produce in them. And that's something that started last year before I even joined the community, and had kind of caught wind with a few members of the community. And we just recently decided, you know, this is really working. There's momentum behind this. We can see how this aligns with our values of creation, care, and being connected to our neighbors, and food justice. And we want to make this a core part of our community, and kind of like a core part of our mission. So similar to what the Hetties were sharing about how people, place, and mission come together over time as you walk through these steps, and I guess experiment and have a lot of conversation and discernment together. Yeah, I think, yeah, I just think that as a community, we're able to step out into those new things, and the dialogue between us leads to more of a commitment. I mean, for example, like if it were just myself, I tend to stay on fences for a little while before jumping in, and community has helped me to get out into the open water more.
I think just speaking from a Springwater perspective and planting a community with the Headies, thinking about Springwater, it's really important to match what you do as a community and experiment and iterate to the people who are in it. And new members have different strengths, the gifts of the body, moving into different disciplines, just scheduling new kids in the mix, all sorts of things. I think it's necessity to be experimenting, to be matching what you do with the people present. That'd be my thing I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, I would just add, I feel like the spirit of experimentation is so important for communities, that we don't get stuck in ways that we've just been doing it this way, or this is what we've always done, that we're open to what people bring, new people, and just allow them to shape our practices and experiments into justice and how we love one another more radically. And also, I think the experimentation idea is really good. It's a way, this is funny, it's sort of a tip, like I guess a community hack, if you will. So consensus is tiring and long and hard. And I think experimentation is a great way to help people that are on sort of that fence, Joe, that you talked about, to step out and say, hey, we're going to try this. Let's experiment together and let's try this for 3 months and come back. And so if you find, something a little risky, you're uncomfortable with it, experimentation, I think, is a great way to step into something that hopefully will bring life in God's kingdom in a real way. But if not, then there's sort of that safety net. And so, yeah, I would say it's going to be a significant part of how we live into community together, is just trying things in what people are comfortable with.
Thank you all. I think we might have time for a quick response to one more question before we wrap up. But before I mention the question, I wanted to say that next time, in our next gathering 2 weeks from now, we will be having a panel, like I said, of some seasoned long-term community members who are available to address some of the questions that have been coming up in all of these sessions. So we'd like to start in the chat now, starting to collect some of those questions. So if you have questions that have arisen over the course of the past few months that you'd like to see addressed in those conversations, go ahead and start typing those in the chat now. Or you can also email them to us. We'll collect them that way as well, at edencommunityabilene@gmail.com, and we'll make sure to send that information to you a little bit later after this call. But one more question that we might get a short response to from anybody. Do any of you who've been speaking with us today have any sort of recommendations about discerning God's will together? And what have you been finding helpful in becoming a community of discernment? That is from Kent Smith.
Yeah, we can share a little bit about that. Do you want to share about the process of discernment that you've?
Well, Joe and Nancy tipped us off on a book called Discerning God's Will Together. And it's put together by some Presbyterian ministers, I think. And so it's relevant to everyone. But it lays out a nice process. So if you imagine like a spiral, and at the core is God's will. And so there's these steps, and you might circle back around these steps, but you're always keeping in mind, like, what does God have for us? And you're listening together for that. And one important step, I'm not going to say all the steps right now, I did put it in the chat there, that book, is shedding. And that's just sort of laying down all the things on your mind, all your preconceived wishes and notions, all your biases. And then that's when you allow the Spirit to lead instead of how you're coming to the room. Yeah. What do you want to say?
Well, I would just say, I think one thing that's helped us as we've been doing discernment a lot, starting in Hope Fellowship days and Springwater, we do a lot of discernment together. We've had a lot of practice, but I think what's been really important is demystifying discernment. It's what it's not, what it is. It's not giving your decision over to others to decide for you. It is a process of losing control, if control is our own ideas that we think are best, but it's not out of the context of God's great love and care and sustaining power in our lives. What it is longing, trying to discern and understand God's longings. And so God's longings are varied and wide. And that's what I really liked about the Discerning God's Will Together book, is everything is a movement towards discerning God's longings. And then it's about us participating in those longings.
Thank you. That was beautifully said. Well, I think we are going to need to wrap up for today. It has been such a blessing to hear from you all. Thank you, Jackie, Joe, David, Hannah, David, everybody else who spoke into this process. It has been just delightful to hear from you all. And I know that I have learned from you and been encouraged by you. And I think that that's true for everybody else who's on here. In the next few days, we will work toward getting this recording made available. We're also still, I think, working on posting the one from Bruderhof. We ran into a few technical issues that got us a little behind schedule on that, but hopefully it'll be available pretty quickly. We'll also send out the updated contact information sheet if there were any new people who joined in on this call who hadn't been on the previous ones. So be looking for those in your email. And again, if you have any questions that you'd like to see addressed in the upcoming conversation about community and our panel next time, be sure to send those to us at edencommunityabilene@gmail.com. Thank you all for your presence here today. It has been such a blessing to be with you, and we look forward to seeing many, many of you again 2 weeks from now. Thank you, Lord, for your presence with us and the ways that you have brought us together as communities who can love one another, support one another, and pour into one another as we all seek your Spirit's guidance in this path that you have us on. Bless us as we go from here to be your presence and to see your presence in the world around us. Amen.
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 Have a delightful day.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye for now, friends.
Bye. Take care.